Chapter 6: The Communard Union and its Foundational Congress. Among the many challenges in rural organizing is a merely physical one: the distances that must be crossed. Producers in the countryside are, by the very nature of their work, separated across a territory and must come together to debate, socialize, and plan. In Venezuela, the problems endemic to rural organizing are heightened these days by the gas crisis and the scarcity of auto parts. This was evident one afternoon in early March 2022 when hundreds of people from around the country began to converge on El Maizal Commune in central West Lara State. They arrived in ramshackle buses, run-down trucks, and the occasional, still functioning personal car. They had endured hard travel conditions, heat, dust, and sometimes harassment by police officers asking for papers and more at roadblocks. Once on the ground of El Maizal Commune, these committed people unloaded their sleeping bags and bedrolls, but they also unpacked banners, notebooks, and pamphlets. Who were these intrepid travelers, and what drew them here? They were Communard delegates from all around the country, hailing from most of the nation's 23 states, and they had come to El Maizal for 3 days of debate and planning. As we have seen, communes became important during Hugo Chávez's last years when he was developing a strategy of advancing towards socialism by using these grassroots spaces and self-managed production and substantive democracy as its basic cells. Since the president's untimely death in early 2013, the communal project he promoted has faced numerous challenges, including the rightward turn of his successor's government under the pressure of sanctions and hybrid war. Despite these challenges, commune building goes forward in an almost miraculous way in the country, driven by grassroots forces whose commitment can be explained by a combination of loyalty to the former president, the pressing necessity to produce food, and their political consciousness. However, these communes, which are sown across the country and without much support, are embattled outposts, weakened by their isolation. This means that they have been forced by the overall capitalist context to make many concessions, especially in terms of commodity production. To begin to overcome this situation of isolation, there have been attempts to build unity among the country's communes. The most important of these is the Communard Union, Unión Comunera, whose foundational congress was the destination of the delegates arriving in buses, trucks, and cars to El Maizal in the dry heat of that March afternoon. Origins of the Communard Union. Why build a league or union of communes? It is obvious that unifying and coordinating the work of these scattered projects is important if Venezuelan communes are not to be merely picturesque refuges, but rather a counter-hegemonic system that reaches beyond the local to the national level, and even beyond. The complication is that this coalescing force should come from below, from the grassroots, yet it must supersede the local. In effect, each space wrested from capital's logic is a battle won. But unless these diverse spaces collectively point to a widening sphere of emancipated territory, that is, unless there are advances on micro and macro levels at the same time, then such precarious first steps can easily be reabsorbed into capital's logic and its hydra-headed institutions. It is almost certainly for this reason that in Aló Presidente Teórico Número Uno, Chávez went so far as to say that an isolated commune is actually counter-revolutionary. Communes are like cells, and cells have to go on branching out, forging connections, he said in that historic television program. They have to create a system, link up, and give shape to a body. Clearly then, the late president saw communes as part of an organic whole and future national system. Notably, too, the communal laws that were developed in 2010 as part of the package of 5 popular power laws propose associating the communes in communal cities, in federations, and also as a basis of a future communal state. All this is on the level of theory and legislation. However, the idea for a Communard union, like most concrete steps in the communal movement, was in fact born under the pressure of necessity. The need for a unifying and integrating instrument, as the Union describes itself in its statutes, emerged in great measure because the more advanced communes in the country found themselves alone in an adverse situation, marked by political regression and pragmatism on the part of the new governmental leadership. For example, at El Maisal, possibly the most advanced commune in the country, people felt that they were facing both an external counter-revolution and what they call the internal reformist fifth column. Both the local bourgeoisie and the regional authorities were treating El Maisal commune badly, while the government seemed to have turned its back on the project. Its charismatic leader, Angel Prado, had even had an election for mayor taken away from him a few years back for bureaucratic reasons. The commune seemed to be cornered. For this reason, the communards from El Maisal felt the pressing need to build a network of support with other communes and other Chavista groups in the country. There was a meeting with the participation of 10 communes in Che Guevara commune in Mérida in 2019. Here, the first plans for the future Communard Union were laid. Then there were local meetings, 5 in total, for each of the country's major regions, while the promoting committee formed the Argelia Laya Brigade. This was made up of youths who traveled the country under difficult conditions, connecting with insipid or abandoned communes and motivating their members. An important preliminary meeting took place at the Ali Primera commune in Urachiche in 2021. The preparatory work of building the union went on for almost 3 years, briefly interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Along the way, the organizers were successful in generating interest, and they made important steps towards reaching consensus. However, bringing the communes together into a nationwide movement necessarily evokes a host of questions about forms of leadership, decision-making methods, and critically, the relation of the communes to each other and of their union to the state's institutions. Will this latter be a friendly relation, an antagonistic one, or a bit of both? Will the union extend and develop the democratic principles that operate inside the diverse communes that make it up, presumably in a prefigurative mode? These are the burning questions that would have to be resolved downstream in the Communard Union's Foundational Congress. The debates. Debates on these issues surfaced quickly in the Foundational Congress, which so many people had crossed the country in March of 2022 to attend, using whatever means of transport were available in the besieged country. Once these 200 or so delegates from roughly 50 communes had dusted themselves off, recuperated from the trip with water and snacks, and plopped themselves into the neatly organized rows of seats arranged in El Maisal's machinery shed, the controversies and discussions began. Despite the good-natured, even festive atmosphere in the meetings, the delegates freely offered their opinions about diverse issues that the new union would face. The question of state power and the relation of the union to it was never far from the surface. For example, Angel Prado, whose commune was hosting the event, told those assembled that he thought the fledgling union could be committed to being just as constructive as it was critical in the relation to the central government. To the degree that the communes criticized the state, they would also try to build something new and construct an alternative. Instead of antagonism with the state, Prado argued that what is really at stake were simply different visions of the country. The government has its plan, its interpretation of the Plan de la Patria, the plan for the nation that Chavez developed, he said, while we have our own interpretation of the plan. Prado also pointed to the importance of supporting the government and its PSUV party in upcoming elections. As the charismatic leader of a powerful rural commune, Prado has great moral authority. One might have thought that his position would set the tone for the remaining interventions. However, some of the other delegates tried to push the envelope of radicalness and put alternative visions on the table during the initial debates. For example, Johan Tovar from the Luisa Cáceres commune in Anzoátegui state was clearly not so interested as Prado in supporting the ruling party as its rear guard. He said he wanted to see a communal republic emerge in Venezuela. Even more critical was Marta Lía Grajales from the San Agustín Convive initiative in Caracas, who went so far as to say that the government does not represent the people. It does not call on them to participate anymore. In the view of Grajales, who has had to confront state repression in the poor urban communities where she works, this made the Communard Union all the more important, since the diverse, self-organized groups around the country, much more than the state, were what was now maintaining Chávez's ideals and goals alive. Among these varied perspectives, some more hopeful with regard to the state, others more pessimistic, one can perceive some of the fissures in the shifting sands of Venezuela's popular movement today. What is the relation of the movement to the governments? Is it symbiotic, a kind of détente, or antagonistic? Should the communal movement aspire to replace existing state power? And, if so, over what time frame? These questions are difficult and hard to get to the bottom of. An ambivalent relation to the state has long been a part of the political culture of Venezuela's social movements, where a loose, open-ended, and generally affirmative approach to state institutions predates the Bolivarian process. Such practices were promoted and consolidated during the populist governments of the Fourth Republic, 1958 to 98. But they were also reinforced during the 2 decades of Chavismo. This means that when Venezuela's social movements face state power today, there are almost no red lines, but rather a push and pull that depends on the circumstances. The minister arrives. The lack of red lines and the full spectrum of behaviors associated with it was on display after an important representative of the state itself arrived at the meeting. This was Jorge Arreaza, the new minister of Communes, who was pulled in at the head of his 3-car entourage on the second day of the Congress. The minister's surprise visit elicited many echoes of Fourth Republic politics and its chummy populism. Arreaza was offered the microphone, and he went before the audience, seemingly protecting himself with the red "Commune or Nothing" t-shirt he was wearing, and a recently gifted El Maizal cap pushed down over his head. There, Arreaza gave a longish but humble discourse. Wise ministers know how to adapt their words to different contexts, the essence of which was that the ministry had few resources to help, and that willpower, meaning everybody pitching in, would be key to the communal movement advancing. Overall, his words were met with a generous and friendly reception. While there was some joking on the part of the Communard leaders about the ministry and its sometimes tense relation with communes, Arreaza's discourse met with hearty applause, and many audience members came forward to take selfies with the minister. Arreaza was Chávez's son-in-law, and he has the reputation of being a reasonable person, more accessible than most bureaucrats, and a good listener. He had recently been working closely with grassroots forces during a campaign for governor in Barinas state, where he tried to break the control of the corrupt branches of Chávez's family over that region. All of this may have helped tip the scales in Arreaza's favor. In fact, it is most likely that he was chosen by higher-ups as minister precisely because of his personal qualities and current street cred. The enthusiasm of people in the communal movement is understandable. Still, I learned from side conversations with some participants in the Congress that they felt the insipid Communard Union's excess of flexibility and its tendency to improvise the relationship with state functionaries could spell future problems for the communal movement. Attempts to dance with the bureaucracy without any clear red lines usually ends with the latter controlling and subordinating the popular movement and its projects. The program. Without doubt, these skeptics have Venezuela's history on their side. Similar movements in the recent past have generally run aground for this reason. One only has to look at what happened to the Ezequiel Zamora Revolutionary Current, a campesino movement born in 2005. Chavismo Bravío, an attempt to regroup the Chavista left around 2012 to 2013, and the Marcha Campesina, which emerged in 2018. These movements and projects, each powerful in its time, have all become co-opted in one way or another, some even becoming appendices of the state and its official PSUV party. This meant that as the Foundational Congress was packing up on the third day, having ratified the Communard Union statutes and program and elected the people to its different national and regional positions, there was much hope, but also an understandable concern about the dangers of historical replay and appropriation. Debates and differences had emerged, and despite a strong commitment to not have them forcibly suppressed, nor let them irreparably divide its ranks, there was still latent disagreements. The path forward, if admirably sketched out and ratified by the Congress, would be by no means easy. The program and statutes of the Communard Union that they had approved is a concise, nicely designed document. It is remarkably solid and constitutes a real asset, even a roadmap charting a way forward. The document's solidity in theoretical terms is hardly surprising, since it was drafted beforehand by the most radical and formed elements of the Communard Union. This is evident in both the program's language and its advanced contents. One key component is the centrality of popular power and substantive democracy. This is the Union's key programmatic element, which it combines with environmentalism, anti-imperialism, feminism, and socialism. The document's preamble takes a historical approach to explaining the country's communal project, charting the importance of grassroots democracy in the first decade of the Bolivarian process. Through this historical recap, one can see how Chavez and the Bolivarian movement considered elections to be one thing. He called them festivals of political machinery, even if he knew how to win them. But the Bolivarian proposal is really based on participative and protagonistic democracy. This was the revolution's real trump card, its essence. And the communal project grows out of that essence, the program says. The Commune is the maximum expression of popular power and substantive democracy. Hence, the Communard Union is meant to continue developing these principles and ultimately work toward the elimination of the bourgeois state. Based on this reading of recent Chavista history, in which popular power is the guiding principle and driving force, the program affirms that the fundamental premise of the communal project is participative and protagonistic democracy. However, it sees this as a dynamic, not static principle, for at the same time it ratifies the importance of the communes as an emergent self-government, one capable of overcoming localism and later leading to the withering of the bourgeois state. This will be achieved through the subsequent forming of a federation of communes, and finally, the communal state. The document also gives importance to socialist formation, that is, education, and it defends the principles of environmentalism, anti-imperialism, feminism, and gender diversity. The section on patriarchy and communal feminism calls for a class-conscious feminism and an end to the double exploitation of women. In economic terms, the Union's program stresses production under new social relations. It defends social property and production aimed at satisfying the community's needs. In general terms, the program commits to strengthening the commune's productive power and, more concretely, to developing non-market distribution networks called the Sistema Nacional de Economía y Producción Comunal among communes and other kindred organizations. Overall, the Union's program reflects advanced, ambitious positions on key issues of the socialist transition. However, despite its sophistication, the program leaves open many questions related to the material and human means for carrying that strategy forward when the hard work of organizing, linking communes, and sharing goods and resources sets in. In that sense, some key issues are, when the Union tries to go forward over the next few years, will it be possible to conjugate the vanguard aspirations of the organizers with the interests of the bases? Will its commitment to communal feminism and gender diversity be cashed out in concrete transformations, such as achieving gender parity and non-binary inclusion in leadership positions inside the Union and in the communes that make it up? Will the Union maintain its principles and strategy, which are solidly socialist, in the face of state actors? Perhaps more important is the question of whether the Union could become the lever that rejuvenates the Chavista movement as a whole, restoring its earlier commitment to socialist emancipation via the Commune. Challenges and solutions. We have mentioned that rural organizing is difficult in any circumstance. The localist cosmovision of many rural producers and their physical separation are notorious challenges for all such organizations worldwide. However, the truth is that any national level popular organization, not just a rural one, is hard to construct in Venezuela. This is because the country's formal working class is small, and the productive apparatus, based essentially on oil extraction and refining, is largely confined to relatively small enclaves. That means most of the population lives in something like what has historically been the atomized peasant condition, even in cities. And it's difficult to build an organization that's bigger than 6 to 8 people, the size of a group of friends or a large family. In this peculiar situation, one of the few national organizations in Venezuela, an organization that reaches over the whole territory, is the country's military. It is the military's territorial reach, far more than its possession of arms, that makes it the institution so important in the Caribbean nation. And its importance is above all political rather than military in a strict sense. The armed forces' territorial reach, along with its surprising class character, explains why Venezuelans have often turned to the military to carry out political tasks. Meanwhile, civilian organizations, even left ones, scramble to bring together workers and citizens, despite the lack of workplace connections and the cultural challenges that they must grapple with when it comes to forming unions. Quite often, these left organizations become pragmatic and adopt similarly hierarchical centralist methods. In fact, the country's long-standing practice in political and social contexts, even grassroots ones, is to insist that there be widespread democracy and a certain level of horizontality. These are also part of the political tradition, while simultaneously injecting strong doses of top-down centralism to avoid chaos and increase their organization's effectiveness. Some of this organizational culture has affected the Communard Union, its methods, and its relation to its bases. It will also inevitably inform its efforts to expand and promote the unity of communes over the upcoming years. True to historical pattern in Venezuela, the Union, even if it is firmly committed to democratic participation, still has opted to give great power to a central committee and its cadres. This is the tried and true historical formula in Venezuela. There is a national direction to the Union, and also regional directions in each of the Plains, Andes, Central, Center-West, and Oriental regions. Both national and regional leaders will meet with some frequency, but the meeting of the whole organization will happen only once every 4 years. This makes for a strong centralized apparatus that, even if it reaches out to the bases, nevertheless falls short of incorporating them into daily decision-making and governments. Moreover, as an internal mode of decision-making, the Union has opted for democratic centralism. This is a wonderful organizational principle, yet it has historically been much more centralist than democratic. Among the unfortunate consequences of the centralist and hierarchical structure of the organization, partly imposed by lack of resources, is that the bases, since they do not see themselves eye to eye as much as they see the leaders, will almost surely begin to perceive the leadership as a power apart or even a conduit to the state. Material and global realities. These were some of the outstanding issues when the Communard Union's Foundational Congress came to a close, and the delegates packed up and took their leave of each other, with a deserved feeling that they had taken part in a historic triumph for the country's communal movement. However, in the summer and fall after the Congress took place, when I checked back on friends working in the Communard Union, I learned that they had indeed faced many problems in bringing the Union's ambitious program to fruition. The Union had been working on food distribution projects called rutas to encourage non-market exchanges of fish, meat, cheese, and coffee among communes, and also to bring rural food production to Caracas. The aim of this project was to break the hold of capitalist intermediaries between rural production and urban consumption. Still, none of the rutas had actually been initiated. The logistical problems had proven overwhelming. The Union was too short on resources to kickstart the distribution process, and it had made almost no advances on the economic front in 5 months. Even so, they had done work in other areas. For example, the Union had successfully organized some events, including one hosted by Tatui TV to educate militants in communication techniques, and another involving leadership training. They had reactivated the Argelia Laya Brigade and had managed to consolidate the participation of some Plains region communes into the Union, even if the country's most important urban commune, El Panel, still remains outside. The stories from my contacts in the Union all spoke for its members' strong commitment, as shown in its impressive deployment of cadres throughout the country. But there were also serious obstacles, quite often related to the situation of the neediest communes and the expectations of the Union's bases. One Union cadre who had gone on some of these trips remarked on how the immediate aim of those in most communes around the country rarely goes beyond getting financial or material support. Moreover, as could be anticipated due to the Union's structure, the majority of communes look to it simply as a communication channel with the state. Indeed, the Union's hierarchical structure tends to relegate the grassroots to pursuing corporative, sectoral interests over the political project, while the leadership finds itself somewhat isolated in pursuing its more ambitious goals of forcing the hand of the state and hegemonizing the country. This situation suits the state and the ministries well, since they prefer to deal with communes either one by one or as part of networks that they manage themselves, as is evidenced in the Ministry of Communes' recent launching of a communal circuit project that in some ways rivals the Union's self-organized rutas. In evaluating organizations, it is always important to look closely beyond their explicitly conceived aims at their position within the framework of the country's economic activity. What is the economic basis of the Communard Union and its relation to other economic actors in the country? This is the Ariadne's thread that runs through many organizational projects, and it can help us understand the real forces that they deploy and with which they must engage. Sometimes such material issues have almost as much impact as what is said or has been committed to paper. In a Venezuela that is under a cruel U.S. blockade, material resources are extremely scarce, with most people living very little above the survival level. The same could be said for the struggling organizations that might enter the Communard Union. Most of them must operate more as potential beneficiaries and very little as potential donors. That means that they might subscribe to the Union and even endorse its combative spirit and political program, but they have neither the resources nor necessarily even the will to engage in a war of positions with the power of capital or the state, which has historically been the financial basis of even grassroots organizations in the country. The Venezuelan communes and their new unifying organ, the Communard Union, are hopeful players in this context, but they're not free from its complexities and contradictions. As far as the Union's staying power is concerned, it has as assets the strength of some very powerful communes on its side, as well as the legacy of grassroots Chavismo's long trajectory of struggle. Moreover, despite the challenges related to its limited internal democracy and its residual hierarchies, it is also possible that these problems are as much effects as causes of the Union's weakness. That means that the gradual accumulation of forces, especially if there are similar advances in the rest of the Latin American region, could tip the scales in favor of the Union and Venezuela's communal movement more broadly as they advance. There is cause for optimism on this front, for a brief survey of the region, and even the world today, indicates that there are many kindred progressive movements emerging in our time, the convergence of which could be important as the Communard Union attempts to carry forward Chavez's historic project in the face of future challenges. The next chapter looks at how a group of industrial workers in Venezuela is engaging with the communal movement.